Today I'm with Nancy Cowan, a knit designer. Good morning, Nancy.
Good morning, Brett.
How long have you been knitting and how did you learn how to knit?
Well, that's a good question. I began knitting the first time when I was 10 and didn't have much success at it. I started knitting again when I was 16 and I got about half a scarf done and then I put it down again. As an adult, I tried a couple more times, so really about 5 times. The fifth time was right after my first child was born, and that was almost 20 years ago, and I haven't put down the knitting needles since.
Who influenced you over those years, those 5 times you started and stopped? Was there anybody that influenced you along the way?
Well, when I started knitting as a teenager, that was my grandma, who was from Norway, and she was an amazing knitter. She made those multicolored Norwegian sweaters. Also, I lived in Scotland for a year and a half, and I really loved those elaborate cable knit sweaters that they made. It seemed like everybody there knew how to knit, and I wanted to learn how too.
What do you know about the history of knitting?
Well, nobody knows exactly when people began to knit. Um, it is known that knitted socks have been found in Egyptian tombs from 1100 AD. But by the 1500s, knitting was a thriving cottage industry. It was originally something that only men did, and you had to be part of the guild in able to sell your knitting and to ensure good quality knitting. But there was like I said, a cottage industry where you could go out after the shearing and pick up extra bits of wool, bring it home. Mom would spin it up and dye it, and then after Dad was done working on the farm, he and the kids would sit around the fire and knit socks for the nobility.
What do you do with your knittings and what have you made over the years?
I've made just about everything that you could think of. I made gloves, I made hats, I've made sweaters, of course. I've made socks, and I made, at one point, sock monkey costumes for all of my children. And I don't usually do Afghans, but when I was expecting a baby, then I would do an Afghan for the baby.
So you did it all by hand, right? So when you're knitting, you're doing it all by hand.
I usually knit by hand. I have worked a little bit with a knitting machine.
Okay, so tell me the difference between knitting and crocheting, because somebody asked me once, do you knit or do you crochet? Is this a knitting or a crochet that you did? And I know that you knit, but I didn't know the difference between knitting and crocheting. So maybe explain the difference.
Crochet is a little different, and there are a lot of people who crochet. It's considered simpler than knitting because you use only one hooked needle instead of 2 needles like you would when you're knitting. Also, crochet, you deal with one loop at a time, whereas knitting, you deal with a row of loops.
And then where do you see knitting in the future?
I believe that there are many people who are interested in knitting. They just don't know how to get started. You can go to the store and you can pay for something that's knitted, but if you have something that you've made yourself, it's unique and nobody else has one like it.
Yeah, I know you have these animals, these Paca vicuña animals, which are it's what, a crossbreed between an alpaca and a vicuña. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Now, a vicuña is basically a wild alpaca, and you won't find them in this country because it's illegal to import them. However, there were some animals in South America that were half vicuña and half alpaca, and they showed the vicuña characteristics, and those were brought to the United States. There are probably fewer than 1,000 of them in existence, and their fiber is measured in what you would call microns. Um, a good alpaca has fiber between 20 and less than 30 microns, which is very soft, and the lower the number, the softer it is. But a good Paco vicuña will have between 12 and 20 microns. So it is even softer than alpaca, and it's comparable to Kiviot or cashmere.
Okay, so you knit with this material. this fiber that you get from your animals, and what do you want to do with this fiber?
Well, right now you can mostly just find basics, scarves and hats and mittens out of Paco Vicuña. And what I would like to do is produce a line of Paco Vicuña sweaters with beads and lace.
Nancy, thank you for your time to spend some time with me today, and I know we have plans to meet again next week.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, we'll see you next week.